Hi, good morning everybody. My name is Purnima, like I've already been introduced. So this is a hard one to follow up on after so many people have spoken, but I'm glad because I kind of speak about something very different, well not different obviously, within the space of early childhood education and development, but I bring in a little bit of data and maybe we can think about what we know. We know a lot from, for example, from research that has happened outside. We know a lot of what other people have done. But going forward, if we have to think about what works, what doesn't work, to take stock of what is the current research, at least from India. Chris, you have the presentation?
Yeah.
Not working. So, okay, I'll speak on while the presentation comes up. I'm basically going to be talking about some findings, very obviously chosen selectively since we have only 5 minutes here. But I'm going to be talking about a study that Asa Center and Ambedkar University, Delhi conducted with the support of several organizations like UNICEF, Bernard Van Leer Foundation, in fact, as well. This was something that we started in 2011 and went up till 2015, following 13,000 children in 3 states of the country, where we followed them from ages 4 to 8. So it gives us a pretty expansive look at what young children in these 3 states in 2 districts do at different points in time. And across these 5 years, we conducted, this was largely a quantitative survey-led research, followed up with 1 qualitative round with households where we wanted to understand from parents some things, and I'll talk about that as we come in. Oh, great. So like I was saying, we started in 2011, went up to 2015, between ages 4 and 8. We have 11 survey waves, and what we were doing is roughly in every calendar year of January and December, we were going in at least 3 times to find out what the child was doing, what kind of institution were they enrolled in, were they in an Anganwadi, government preschool, etc., etc. Whether they were attending or not attending, collecting a host of information from their households, from the centers through observations. So there's a lot of data, but I'm only going to be talking about 3 things. So the 3 things that I want to be talking about, I have 1 sort of finding on what children do, why parents do the things, well, because parents often make the decisions about what children do, why they from the interviews that we've conducted, some of the things that parents say, and then finally about the classrooms that these children find themselves in, specifically the ECD, ECE classes. Go ahead, thank you. So the first thing that we found very soon starting the study was that what children of similar ages do across the country is extremely diverse. What that means is not just that you have varying proportions of children attending an Anganwadi center versus a private preschool. What that also means actually is the exposure that the child is getting or the environment that the child is in is diversely different. And it is akin to being different, as different from when you belong to an extremely rich family to an extremely poor family. And that's the wide amount of diversity that we're talking about. But important things that we still find. For example, in Assam and Telangana, specifically in Assam, we found that children in this state and the 2 districts that we went in were more likely to be doing the things that age and development markers required them to do. So and everything in research has to come with a caveat. So for example, at least 77%, close to 80% children at age 5 were in Anganwadi centers. Whereas if you look at Rajasthan and Telangana, we have significant proportions already entering school. So, and this proportion just continues. But if you look at policy, what does policy say? We have an RTE Act saying that age 6 children need to be entering grade 1. But you have over 23, on my last count, 23 states in the country allowing children to get into standard 1 at age 5. So what does that mean when we're talking about I mean, so then the next questions to follow up is, do we need a standardization? Why is a standardization necessary? What does it do? If it's helpful, how is it helpful? And of course, we have a lot of development research from neuroscience, from economics, telling us that there are age and development markers across, the first 5 years of life, of course, at most stages, but at least in the first 5 years, there are critical periods of development. And so what does it mean for a child entering formal school environments at age 5 as opposed to age 6? So that's the one thing. And of course, there are several other differences I'm not getting into. For example, private preschool being, wrap up, I'm already done. Private preschools sort of being extremely preferred in Rajasthan and Telangana, for example. Some of the things, so we went and interviewed about 180 families and parents to understand why they chose the different kinds of schools or preschools where children went over the last 4 years when we had tracked them. And just hold on till here. And often, more often than not, the kind of reasons that they would be talking about, very important to them, were practical concerns like convenience, distance. Anganwadi, mere colony, we were in rural area, but mere hamlet mein hai, mere tole mohalle mein hai, तो मेरा बच्चा वहाँ पे आराम से जा सकता है या फिर बड़ा भाई स्कूल जाता है तो उसको छोड़ के चला जाता है. Those were the things. Anganwadi was extremely preferred in places because it was free, because there was food being served. In other places, it was because other children in the neighborhood or within the family had gone to these centers. And I'm talking about both government and private preschools, for example. But what we were hoping to hear, which we did not very often hear, was for parents to talk about quality. Now, as researchers, as practitioners, we already have notions of what quality is. But often for parents, if you could just go to the next slide, please. You can do the whole thing. I will skip the animation. On this end is what parents said. What I've done is we've mapped it across to what policy says we should do, and apparently policy is based on research. But these are some of the differences that you find. In no place that we see that what parents were saying was what policy hoped they would do or what research hopes they should do. One of the most important takeaways for me as a person working on ECE is that there is this predominant sort of parents understand the importance and the value of ECE. It's not to say that parents don't. I think the Anganwadi system, the one thing if it's done for us is that, yes, it has a very weak ECE component, but in terms of making sure the baseline awareness of early years is fairly established in most parts of the country, if not everywhere, of course. But what is lacking is the understanding of why we need play, why we need activity-based learning. Parents feel that ECE is most effective as a stepping stone to school. So they need to get academic inputs. They need to start learning alphabets and words, which they don't need to, because Standard 1 is going to make them do that. They need to start learning English, which they don't need to because they're never going to listen to English and therefore gain the linguistic capacities to be able to learn that. So what I'm saying is, I think the Anganwadi system already offers us the platform and the channels to communicate this particular aspect of the early years to the parent community and to villages. Which, if it's done effectively, can only make it better, because we see that Assam, for example, has a very strong system of Anganwadi Karyakartas working in the communities that they were in, versus Rajasthan, where it was an extremely dismal situation. And so, of course, parents' perceived reactions to Anganwadi were much poorer in Rajasthan, where it was much more positive in Assam. So we know that these differences exist, and I think, of course, the one thing to do is to improve the quality of the system itself, but the other is also to make sure that parents understand what is good, what do we mean by developmentally appropriate, which often, of course, they're coming at it from, mera bachcha jaldi sikhega, to school mein aage अच्छा करेगा, which actually is contrary to everything that we know from research. So I'll leave it there. I think it's, I have one more slide, but I think we can.
Please go ahead. It's really interesting.
Thank you. So the last slide that I have is from the work, if you could just move ahead. From the work that colleagues at Ambedkar University did in this research, they developed extensive protocols to sort of go and conduct observations within classrooms to understand what makes for a good practice. And these are just some percentages, but what we find is that private preschools, which are extremely, I'm forgetting the word, it's attractive to parents, right? एक तो private है, और दूसरा English medium है, so it becomes super, super attractive. But private preschools are extremely poor environments for children. We often went in doing observations where LKG, UKG, nursery, standard 1 was sitting cramped in a classroom and they were reading out of a textbook, and I often wondered, that's where rote learning is starting. It's already started for several years before, and it's going to continue for several years later, right? So formal learning, teaching practices start very early in private preschools. The proportion of play-based activities that we see in Anganwadi is slightly better. Well, of course, this is coming from these specific sites that the research was conducted, but it's still not as much as we ought to expect from programs. And I think the last thing that, I'd just like to highlight here is that private preschools sometimes, more often than not actually, sort of push this downward curriculum extension from primary school. So I'm going back to the point of making communities understand why that is not required. And it's not for them to be blamed. That's not the idea. They just need to understand, because we feel that often parents have the best interest of their children, and it just needs to be sort of channelized based on certain other practices that we already know of. So thank you for your time.